I realized something was terribly wrong before I even opened the envelope. It sat on the kitchen counter, innocent and cream-colored, the kind of mail you almost toss aside without thinking. But my name was not printed on the front. Only his, my husband, smiling in his sleep every night, as if the world rested comfortably beneath his feet. I should have walked away right then, but I was still the woman who believed people told the truth simply because they promised they would. My name is Marin, and this is the moment I stopped believing him. I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the papers slowly, feeling my heartbeat tap harder with each line my eyes scanned. The loan documents, the property title, the official registration, all the details of our new house, the one I had spent months dreaming about and years saving for. His name appeared in every field where an owner should be listed. Mine appeared nowhere, not even in the tiny notes at the bottom. I read the page twice, then a third time, hoping the ink would rearrange itself into something reasonable. It did not. When he came home, I held the papers up like a teacher catching a child in a lie. He looked at me, then at the documents, then back at me with a grin that softened into a laugh. Not nervous laughter, not embarrassed laughter. Real laughter, as if the whole thing were a harmless joke I was taking too seriously. "It is just easier for taxes," he said, waving his hand like he was shooing away a fly. "You know how complicated things get with two names on everything. Trust me, this is better, cleaner. You should be grateful a man knows how to handle this kind of thing. Grateful." The word sat heavy in the air, sour and smug. I felt something crawl up the back of my throat, a mix of disbelief and something sharper. I reminded him that I had paid the down payment. Every last cent had come from my savings, the savings he once praised me for maintaining. He shrugged as if money were a minor detail in a story he had already rewritten. Later that week, his mother came to see the house. She stepped inside with the confident air of someone who believed she owned every room she entered. When she asked about the paperwork, he told her proudly that the house was in his name alone. She clasped her hands together like he had performed some noble act. "Smart boy," she said. "A woman should appreciate a man who provides. It is the natural order of things." I poured her coffee and smiled sweetly, the kind of smile you give to someone who will never understand you. Her voice droned on about tradition and gratitude and how lucky I was. I nodded at all the right moments, even offered her a slice of lemon cake. She took it, unaware that every polite gesture I made was a small stone added to the wall I was building between us. Inside, something tightened, something focused. I began to gather the documents that proved the truth he was trying to erase. Bank statements showing the transfer from my account. Emails from the realtor where we discussed our shared ownership. Copies of conversations that showed I had been the one making plans, sending deposits, arranging inspections. I tucked everything into a folder that I slid beneath sweaters he never bothered to move. I watched him grow comfortable in the certainty that I would let this go. He moved around the house whistling, satisfied, convinced he had secured both the home and my silence. I let him believe it. I responded softly, smiled when expected, acted as though my disappointment had evaporated into thin air. But something new was growing in me, steady and deliberate, the beginning of a decision he would not see coming. The decision to leave. Silence became my greatest disguise. It wrapped itself around me like a soft shawl. Something gentle enough to look harmless, but strong enough to conceal every intention forming beneath it. My husband and his mother interpreted my quiet as surrender, which suited me perfectly. They grew so confident in the illusion that I sometimes wondered how they ever mistook me for someone who would tolerate being erased. I moved through the house with an easy smile, cooking dinner, folding laundry, asking about his day as though nothing inside me was shifting. He believed the performance because it made his life easier to think I had accepted everything. He lounged more, complained less, and stopped pretending to value my input. His mother visited often, making a habit of inspecting the home as if she were checking on a property deeded to her family line. Her comments grew bolder each time. She would pat my arm and tell me that a peaceful wife is a blessing. She would praise her son for being responsible enough to manage everything. I poured her tea with steady hands while cataloging every degrading sentence she let slip. Not because I cared about her opinion, but because contempt made it easier to stay focused on the future I was building quietly behind their backs. At night, when the house settled into stillness, I researched the true market value of the home. I discovered it was worth far more than he had ever told me. The down payment I had contributed was not the small favor he dismissed it as. It was the foundation of the entire investment. I saved copies of every appraisal I found, every tax estimate, every financial breakdown that mattered. I created a paper trail so meticulous, even he would not be able to argue with it. The lawyer I contacted worked in an office across town where no one knew me. I chose a weekday afternoon, claiming I had errands to run, and took a bus instead of driving. The receptionist greeted me with polite indifference, and the lawyer listened carefully as I explained how my husband had titled the house in his name despite my contribution. She did not look surprised. She told me exactly what documentation I needed, how to protect myself, and what steps to take if I ever wanted to claim my share. I left her office with a folder of information and a sense of direction that felt sharper than anything I had held in years. Meanwhile, his mother grew smugger by the week. She walked through my kitchen like it belonged to her, rearranging spices while lecturing me about loyalty. My husband echoed her sentiments without even realizing he was doing it. He spent more time on the couch, less time pretending to care about my aspirations, and he acted as though the house validated him instead of exposing the truth of his entitlement. They both relaxed into the assumption that I would always remain exactly where they placed me. Their confidence was my camouflage. When the morning came for my departure, I moved with the same calm I had practiced for weeks. I woke early and made coffee, humming softly so he would not suspect anything. He came into the kitchen rubbing his eyes, asked if I had plans for the day, and kissed the top of my head with casual affection. I told him I was taking a short trip to visit a friend. Nothing dramatic, just a day away to clear my mind. He nodded without looking up from his phone. He did not ask which friend. He did not ask where I was going. He did not even ask when I would be back. His indifference made leaving easier. I walked out the door with a small bag and drove straight to the bank. I withdrew every dollar that belonged to me, every cent I could legally claim without question. From there, I stopped at a small electronics store and bought a cheap phone to use temporarily. Outside in the parking lot, I powered off my real phone, the one that held years of messages, memories, and excuses. It felt strangely final, like snapping the last thread of a rope that had held me in place for too long. Then I drove away without looking back. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The first place I stayed after leaving him was a tiny apartment above a bakery that opened before sunrise. The scent of warm bread drifted through the floorboards every morning, waking me before my alarm. At first, the early hours irritated me, but in time I realized the smell felt like permission to begin again. I needed that feeling desperately. I found temporary work at a small design studio that needed someone to handle scheduling and client files. The job was simple, steady, and free of the judgment I had carried for so long. No one there knew me as the woman who let her husband take credit for everything. They only knew me as Maren, the woman who showed up on time and worked hard without complaining. In the evenings, I sat at the small second-hand desk I had bought from a thrift shop and taught myself skills I had once believed were beyond me. My husband had a way of speaking that made me feel incapable, even before I attempted something. He delivered quiet dismissals wrapped in compliments, telling me I was smart but not the business-minded type, creative but not practical enough, responsible but not a leader. Alone in that tiny apartment, I tested each of those assumptions and found none of them true. I learned spreadsheet formulas, bookkeeping basics, and the fundamentals of digital marketing. Each skill made me feel taller, steadier, more certain that leaving had been the smartest decision of my life. After 2 months, I picked up evening shifts at a local cafe to supplement my income. The manager, a woman named Flora, had a laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. She taught me how to pull espresso shots and how to handle impatient customers with a smile that suggested I knew something they did not. She became a friend, someone who admired my independence without needing to know the entire story behind it. Connections like that were new to me. My husband discouraged friendships that did not revolve around him or his family. Now I formed them freely, and each one added another layer to the person I was becoming. Of course, he still tried to reach me. His messages arrived in clusters that shifted tone as the weeks passed. The first ones were confused, asking where I was and when I planned to return. When I ignored those, the next wave arrived full of anger and accusations about abandonment. I saw them light up the screen of the cheap phone I had purchased, then disappear unread. Eventually, the messages softened into apologies, long rambling paragraphs about his stress, his confusion, his regret, promises to fix everything if I would just come home. I did not respond to a single one. Instead, I forwarded every message to the folder my lawyer had instructed me to keep. She contacted me once a month with updates about the house. The market value continued climbing, and each rise strengthened my eventual claim. She always ended our calls with the same sentence: "Be patient, Marin. Timing matters more than emotion." Her voice grounded me, reminded me that silence was not weakness. Silence was strategy. The longer I stayed away, the clearer my mind became. I realized how small my world had been when I lived with him. Every decision had revolved around his comfort, his schedule, his expectations. Now my world stretched wider. I spent afternoons exploring the city, evenings talking with new acquaintances, weekends taking online courses. I began charting a financial plan that included saving for a business of my own, something modest but entirely mine. For the first time in my life, I imagined a future that did not require anyone's permission. Meanwhile, his certainty began to crumble. The messages shifted again. He asked if I had talked to a lawyer, asked why the bank had contacted him about updated property values, asked what my silence meant. He grew increasingly desperate, and that desperation told me everything. He did not miss me. He missed the version of me he could control. I continued rebuilding myself piece by piece, gathering strength quietly, steadily, without theatrics. Each passing month widened the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. The foundation was forming, solid and unshakable. He did not know it yet, but the strike he feared was already moving toward him. And I was finally ready. I returned to my hometown, the way a shadow slips across a wall, unnoticed unless someone pays very close attention. No one did. The bus dropped me off 3 blocks from the courthouse, and I walked with my hood up and my bag pressed against my side, feeling the familiar streets tug at old memories I no longer claimed. The air smelled the same, but I did not. I had come back with purpose, not nostalgia. Every step carried the weight of the plan I had spent months shaping with steady, patient hands. My lawyer, a woman named Leora, met me in her office with a stack of papers already prepared. She had the calm confidence of someone who understood the power of timing, and she greeted me with a small nod that told me everything was ready. I sat across from her and reviewed each document: the claim to my share of the property, the proof of the down payment that had come entirely from my savings, the records of the rising market value. Every detail I had collected in secret had become a weapon. Together, they formed the spine of a case he could not bend or break. Once the paperwork was filed, the city gears began turning. Slowly at first, then with increasing momentum as departments processed forms and scheduled evaluations. I stayed in a small short-term rental on the opposite side of town, where no one would think to look for me. During the day, I moved quietly between appointments, signing paperwork, providing verification, answering questions that were always asked in the same careful, neutral tone. At night, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker, knowing each passing day tightened the net around him. He found out I had returned only when his lawyer contacted him. I imagined the expression on his face when he heard the news, that mix of confusion and insult he always wore when reality refused to bend to his will. I did not have to imagine for long. My phone began buzzing within minutes, a relentless string of calls and messages that lit up the screen. He used my name like an accusation at first, demanding explanations, insisting there must be a misunderstanding. When I ignored him, his tone shifted into pleading, then into anger again when pleading did not work. I read none of it. His mother, however, sent messages so long they appeared on the screen as endless gray blocks. She wrote about loyalty, about family, about the importance of keeping private matters within the household. She scolded me for making a scene, accused me of ruining her son's life. then switched abruptly to sentimental lines about forgiveness and second chances. Her words revealed more fear than concern, and that fear told me the truth. They understood this time they could not charm or pressure me back into silence. I kept my focus where it belonged. The house was scheduled for evaluation, and I accompanied the assessor as a legal claimant. Walking through, those rooms felt surreal. I saw the places where I had once placed furniture, the kitchen where I had cooked countless dinners, the hallway where I used to pause and steady myself after arguing with him. Now the house felt hollow, not in a sad way, but in the way a shed snakeskin feels hollow. I had shed that version of myself. I had outgrown it. Leora updated me every few days. The process was moving smoothly. The evidence was strong. His legal team was scrambling. She said they were trying to stall, to negotiate, to delay the inevitable. But the paperwork had already gained too much momentum. The final move was approaching, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I spent the waiting days preparing myself, mentally and emotionally, for the moment the decision would be delivered. It felt like standing at the edge of a storm I had summoned with my own hands, a storm that would wash away the last traces of the life I had once thought I deserved. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel conflicted. I felt precise, steady, and ready. I had waited a long time for this. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, not because of the air, but because of the silence that stretched between each heartbeat. I sat beside Leora, hands folded neatly in my lap, listening as the judge reviewed the evidence. My husband sat across the aisle, shifting uncomfortably, jaw tightening whenever the documents showed my contribution, my savings, my signatures on every early-stage agreement. His mother sat beside him, stiff and offended, whispering comments that made him flush with embarrassment. I watched them without emotion. This was the moment I had prepared for, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing nerves. When the judge announced the ruling, his voice carried the weight of finality. My claim was legitimate. The down payment had come entirely from me. The rise in market value belonged proportionally to the person who had financed the investment. The house was to be sold, and the proceeds were mine. There was no loophole, no technicality, no escape route for him to cling to. I felt the verdict settle inside me like a stone dropping into a still lake. Quiet, certain, irreversible. His mother reacted first. She sputtered in disbelief, pointing at the judge as if he had personally insulted her family. She demanded explanations, insisted there must be a mistake, claimed that tradition and intention mattered more than paperwork. The more she argued, the more ridiculous she sounded, her words twisting into incoherent fragments that even her son could not support. The judge listened politely before reminding her that feelings did not change legal ownership. She sank back into her seat, furious and powerless, two states she had never learned to navigate. My husband's expression shifted through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. He looked down at his hands like he expected answers to appear there, but they did not. He left the courtroom with his shoulders slumped, no longer the confident man who once laughed at my concerns. He walked away with nothing, not even the illusion of control he had fought so hard to maintain. I watched him go without a flicker of regret. The distance between us was complete. When I stepped outside, the sun warmed my face, soft and bright, and for a moment I stood still, letting the light sink into my skin. Leora congratulated me quietly, her voice steady, then left to file the final documents. I walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench beneath a willow tree, feeling the tension seep out of me in slow waves. It was done, truly done. The house would sell quickly, and every dollar of equity would come to me, not as revenge, but as restoration. That afternoon, my phone began to ring. I recognized his number instantly, but I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again, and again. On the fourth call, I answered, not out of curiosity, but because I wanted him to hear the truth he had always avoided. His voice broke as soon as he heard mine. He begged me to explain, begged me to reconsider, begged me to understand how much this was hurting him. He spoke about memories and promises, trying to stitch together a story where we were still connected. I listened until he paused for breath. Then I told him the truth. I reminded him how he dismissed me, how he minimized my contributions, how he believed I would stay small because my quiet made me easy to overlook. I told him he had built a world where only his needs mattered, and he was shocked that I chose not to live in it anymore. I told him that this outcome was not cruelty. It was consequence. He cried softly on the line, waiting for comfort I no longer offered. I let the silence stretch between us, then ended the call without saying goodbye. It felt like closing a door that should have been shut years earlier. 2 days later, I left town again. This time, I did not slip away like a ghost. I packed my belongings, locked the door of my temporary rental, and walked toward the train station with my head lifted and my steps steady. I was not disappearing. I was moving forward. In the quiet that followed, I thought about the shape of betrayal, how it carves into you, how it forces you to rebuild with sharper edges and clearer boundaries. I thought about how many people rise only after they have been pushed aside. It is a universal pattern, as old as survival itself. Some stories begin with loss. Mine simply ended with freedom.